Before I get started building up my profiles, and you can kind of see down here the two that I'm going to be working with, but as a prerequisite to doing this process at all, we need to make sure that we have library data available to us that we can publish to. So in order to do that, I'm going to open up my projects list and just take a quick second and look at my project as it's been defined. So this is the project that I use for all of my demos and presentations. And within it, there's a couple of things that I need to check. First and foremost, I do have a libraries location that I've built for image locations. Now, this part isn't absolutely required, but I did create a couple of thumbnail images for the logos and things that I'm going to be putting in there for the icons for my symbols. When I go in and insert the frames, I want to be able to see that image. And all I did is just opened up, took a screenshot of the profile and then dropped it into Sketchbook and did a little bit of cleanup in it so that it's aesthetically pleasing for, the application, whether it's a folder or a little icon. But again, I wanted to save those in a place that was well stored and definitely taken care of. Libraries like this are really easy to set up. You would literally just right click and add the path. And once you've done that, you can then do whatever pathing you need inside of this space. The second and much more important aspect of this is making sure that I have a read-write library, content center library enabled within this IPJ file. So to check that, I'm just going to go to the Done button and straight up to the Configure Content Center Libraries. Once I'm inside of this space, it's going to show me all of the existing libraries that I have within my, in this scenario, my Inventor desktop content. The alternative to this would be the Vault ADMS or Vault Autodesk Data Management Server console. And within that space, we can see all of the various read-only libraries that come with an Inventor. In addition, I have my library that I've created. That's the read-write library that I'm going to be using. I've also created an 80/20 library or found an 80/20 library that has several different rail profiles in it that I'll jump in and just kind of show, how far into this you can really get. But it's important to make sure that that library is checked as in use. If you are using a fresh installation of Inventor and say using the default project, this is most likely not turned on. It may exist, but it may not be enabled within that project. So this step is absolutely critical. You can create as many profiles as you want, but if you don't have a library to publish them to, you're not going to have very much success. One other thing that I do want to note about this dialog is that my libraries for me are currently on my machine. And that's great because I don't work with anyone else. But if you're working in a collaborative environment, you would definitely want to make sure to change this path, right? This C drive location is on my local machine. And so it's not necessarily going to be all that advantageous in a shared environment. And just to quickly show where that change is made, I'm just going to dismiss the dialog here. And if I go to Tools, Application Options, and then the Content Center tab. In here, this is where we can change a couple of options. For starters, if I was going to use the standard IDCL files or I'm in a non-Vault environment, I would want to make sure to change this path to somewhere that's a shared location. If I am using a Vault and it has my Vault libraries on it, all I need to do is just switch the radial, right? And this is a per machine setting, and it's pretty much a set it and forget it sort of setting change. So once you've enabled this, you don't really have to come in here and mess with it too much more after that. So that's, again, the big prerequisite to this, right? Once we have, we know we're going to publish frame profiles, but we need to make sure that we have a place that we can publish them to. With that in mind, the next thing that I want to do is get in and generate a little bit of folder structure inside of that library to make sure that I have a specific place that I can publish these frames to. So to do that, again, on that Tools tab, all I want to do in this case is open up the Content Center editor. And then while I'm inside of this environment, there's a couple of things to look at. If you're not familiar with this window, it's going to basically break down all of the different categories and subcategories on the left-hand side. And it kind of doubles up the view here where we can see the individual folders that are listed here. Most importantly, though, is that right now I'm looking at my specific library. Typically, when you open this, it'll open it in what's called the merged view. And a lot of this stuff is going to be here, but it's going to be essentially like grayed out or phantomed out. And the reason it's like this is that this data, as it stands, is not in an editable library space. And so the general idea here is that I can go in and maybe find a specific entry that I want to maybe copy, and I can copy it into that library that I've created. And in doing that, it then becomes a bold colored frame structure where I can come in and make any kind of edits that I might want to those specific entries. So as I mentioned here, I've kind of already found these libraries, but if I wanted to maybe make changes to these, maybe change their designations or their part numbers, I can make those adjustments from here within those libraries. Now, in my case, as I mentioned, I do want to create a new folder for specific frame rail entries. So I want to create a category in here. In order to do that, I have to turn off all the other libraries. So in my case, I need to first switch to my library. And now from here, I can then start to come in and create my own subcategories within this space. So I'm just going to create a category. We're just going to call this rail frames. And then from here, it gives you these icons. They're kind of, I don't know, in my opinion, they're a little bit ugly. So I'm just going to go load an alternate image file from this. And I just created these bolt rails. And I'm just going to load those icons in their place. And again, all I did was just a little bit of photoshopping to create these shapes. Nothing super complicated. In this case, it is showing me where I'm going to be publishing this data. The other thing that I can change in here is I can come in and specify additional profile data or additional information for this category. Now, this data that's in this list is created because the structural shapes category knows these are values of interest for things like Nastran. So it's going to automatically pull those into any subcategories, i.e. I'm about to create a folder here because it's in that main category. If I didn't have that, I would have to fill in all these values in order to create all of these. Definitely not something I want to do. So from here, I'm just going to click OK, and it'll generate that new bolt rails folder. And again, real easy to do that. I probably could have cleaned this up a little bit more, but I spent like, I don't know, 20 minutes in Sketchbook to generate these images. But now that I have that, now when I go to publish content, I can specifically say I want to publish it in this folder. And if you don't do this step, it's not like the absolute end of the world, but it is kind of helpful to have this already defined. Otherwise, you'll end up kind of painting yourself into a corner when you go to publish, and you'll publish them into the other directory. But going in here and creating a quick category is an easy way to make sure you have this data organized the way that you want. With that being said, it's also not something you can really easily move around within this space. So if I published it to other, it's very, very difficult to move it out of other and into a new folder. I don't even know if it's possible, to be honest. In any case, so I've got my new directory created. So a little bit of prerequisite stuff to get started. From here, I'm going to open up a part file that I want to work with. And, on the surface, there is nothing complicated about this at all. The one thing that, when I teach classes, I try to tell people to keep their sketches simple. This is a gross opposite of that. When I drew this, I drew the entire thing by hand. Each individual entity is its own individual entity. There's no patterning, there's no mirroring in here. You could do those things, make a pattern or a mirror of these objects. I simply chose not to make the process, to make the profile as accurate and as complete as possible. Within this space, there are technically 3 closed loops. The closed loop areas are the actual T-shaped structure in the actual frame itself. Technically, the inside of this circle is a profile. We're using it as essentially like an island. And then inside of this sketch, I actually created another box that is the extents of this entity. And that box serves a very critical role in using a frame member like this within the frame generator tool. So again, as I created this, I just drew up the profile shape that I needed. Another couple of critical things, I knew that I had a specific size that I wanted to work with. I also knew that I had some things like the thicknesses, the radiuses, and so looking at my parameters, I did name off a couple of these parameters that were critical values, right? Oh, excuse me. So in this case, the overall length, which is the extrusion height, and then in my case, since it's a square, just the size of the square. If I had more parameters that were potentially editable, which in my case, on my other part, I have quite a few of them that could be modifiable values, making sure you give them names is going to save you a lot of hassle. In addition to that, looking at my parameters list, I also created a set of user parameters within this space. Now, exactly what you name these is not all that important, but I did pull some very basic information from the profile in order to define these values. So in my case, the profile's area, the overall weight per inch of this component, the moments of inertia in the X and Y directions. And so I just created the value, typed in the unit of measure, and then filled in what it was. Now, with that being said, if I don't know what those values are and I may want to maybe pull them out of this region, I can do so by simply selecting the region properties and then selecting the region of interest. Once I have it selected, I can click calculate and it creates all the data. So in this case, it gives us some of that basic information we might need as far as the area, the total perimeter, the moments of inertia on the component, and so on. So again, basic profile, obviously you want to make this stuff as fully constrained as possible. In my case, we can see here it is fully constrained. So with that being said, I'm going to finish the sketch. Again, we can see in here I do have an overall extrusion of just 1 inch. And so in order to publish this, I'm going to save the file, then switch over to our Manage tab. And in the Manage tab, I'm going to use the authoring tool for structural shapes. Now, what this is doing is it's basically going to take that extrusion and convert it into a functional frame generator profile. So from here, I just need to pick what frame I want to work with. In my case, I'm going to choose that bolt rail. And as I do that, it automatically picked up the base extrusion, since there only is a base extrusion. It also figured out the default base point, which in my case is the 0, 0 of this model. If I didn't want that and I wanted to change it, all I would need to do is come in and select geometry and then pick another location. The third thing in here is really relevant to these shapes. And typically when you're working with these profiles, you wouldn't notch inside of these T-slots. And so I don't want that data to be remainder if I use the coping tool on these parts. So to fix that, I'm going to come in and change the selection here and just simply choose the entire profile. Now, in this case, it does take a moment because I do have to select all of the profiles. And technically, I could stop here, but I want to cut them off square. So I need to come in and click on each one of these corner areas as well. And this is all done inside that one singular sketch. So again, we can see here now the notching profile as a square entity. Now that I've done that, the next thing I want to do is jump over to my parameter mapping. And as I mentioned earlier, the category knows all of the various parameter values that we might want to enter in. Now, in my case, I didn't create all of these. I am going to come in and specify some of them. And all I'm going to do is just come in and use the link, search for my model parameters. So I know my base length is my overall length. I did define the mass per unit length, which in this case is going to be, it's a user parameter, is my weight per inch. I created the moments of inertia in X and Y. So again, I can come in and just define those values. And in all reality, the more of this information you fill in, obviously that's going to play into the more accurate the data is going to be, in the library itself. But again, a lot of this information can push through into tools like Nastran in CAD, where we can run simulations using this frame generator profile without having to use it as a complete solid. So in this case, I've specified the base extrusion profile, the base point profile, as well as my notch profile definitions. I then also went in and defined my parameter mappings. From here, I'm going to tell it to publish now. It's going to then modify that component, and then I'll jump into the next step of the process, which is in turn going to be the publishing to the library. As a couple of general notes in here, I didn't really dive into it, but let me just cancel this out. I can always go into it. So I did the authoring, and we can see over here that it did change how it created the data. So I've got an extrusion profile. It's the same sketch. It creates a starting plane and an ending plane on its own. It created a new extrusion, which is the body, which is the join, and it uses the between options for those planes. It also creates a secondary work plane to define the driven length of the model. So it does all of that work on its own from that publishing tool. Some other things that I've done to this component, I did define a material on the component. I did also define the properties of the object. So looking at, things like the author of it, the part numbers, the stock numbers, a description for this component. If I did want to put in the estimated cost per inch, I could go out to the manufacturer's website, or if we're the manufacturers, I can specify what that is. On the status tab, I didn't change the design status, but I could do that. This plays potentially into how I use Vault. And then from here, I can also add in as many other custom properties that I might want. So in this case, I can specify things like, we sell these in 140-foot initial stock lengths, or in this case, it's got an anodized finish. Again, as much property data as you want to embed in the base component can trickle through into all of your secondary components as generated. In addition to that, if I go back over to tools and then check my document settings, I know that we don't buy these per component. We buy them in length values. So on the bill of materials, I've modified the base quantity from the standard and default each value to use my overall length as a guide. So it's using that general length definition during the publish. So it knows that, hey, we don't buy these per bar, we buy these at how long of each bar. And it does that step during the authoring tool. Okay? So at this point, we have a component that's, again, a basic extrusion with a little bit more complicated of a sketch profile to define things like our notching definitions, as well as a complete and full shape. Once we have that completed, we took it through the authoring step. So the last step of the process that I need to do is to publish this to the Content Center. And to do that, I simply go to the Manage tab, Publish Part. From here, I specify what library I want to publish to, and then where I want to publish that to. And this picked up where it was going based on the, This picked up where it was going based on the definition that I had chosen in the authoring tool. From here, all of my template values are already in place. I can then specify what my key values are. So in this case, how long they are, potentially what part numbers or other values I want to include. I can add those in. In my case, the only one that really matters is how long this component is. The last thing here that I can do is give it a better name, give it a better folder for where it's going to save these files. I can also specify things like what manufacturer there are, what standard I want to use. So in my case, for the manufacturer, I'm going to put us, so HCO, or the manufacturer of this data. Simplified. There we go. The last thing I can do is define an alternate thumbnail image. And again, if I had one already created, I could just go browse for it. For the actual component itself, I didn't create an alternate profile. I'm just going to use what it created here. And then I can just publish that. So once that's now published, if I go to my Content Center editor, I can now see in my library that that bolt rail has been defined. and the values that I had filled in are in the table. So some things that I could potentially do in this table, I'm going to go ahead and right click and edit this family table. And a couple of adjustments I might want to make. For example, if I go to the column properties here, I can specify how this works, where I want to map that data to. I can also add additional columns in here. Map that to a specific value and pull that definition in. Now, in my case, I actually chose one that already existed, but I could add as many additional columns into this as necessary to fill in definitions in the model as I work through this process. Okay. So in this scenario, I only have one size definition for this rail. There's not, the way that I drew it up, it doesn't have the other spec'd out sizes. But if I did want to do that, and say I had a component that had maybe 5 or 10 different dimensions of value, I can specify that I want this to have each one available within the sizing. So to do that, I'm going to save this part out. And as a general note, this bolt rail IPT file, the one that I used to create this, this published content center data, it's not necessarily needed anymore. I'm a big pack rat, so I will keep this probably forever. But in all reality, the data that's in this has been published to the Content Center library. And unless I accidentally delete that Content Center library or forget to migrate it or something to that effect, this part is not something that I need to use in my day-to-day life. It's just gonna kind of hang out as essentially like the published template. So in my case, I do have this curved rail. And in this component, again, similar behavior. I'm not necessarily worried so much about the notch profile, but I did come in and create this to have some variance in the angle of the part. So it's going to spread based on whatever angle I define for this shape. If I were doing this officially, I would probably go in and draw in the actual notch profile shape for this model. Its exact dimensions are really just a pair of concentric circles and a couple of lines to close it up. I just didn't want to draw it in over the top of this for confusion's sake. So at this point, I've got my shape. I've got my shape and it moves the way that I want it to move. So I'm going to finish that sketch. And then again, just like I did before, I'm just going to go to manage and author this component out. From here, I can specify where I want this to get published to. I've got my defined point. I'm not going to worry about the notch selection. It's just going to use that shape as it's defined. In here, the only one that's actually required is that top row. So in my case, I know that I have my model dimension for the overall length of this component. So now that I have that, I can tell it to define the authoring. If I go check my parameters in here, I know that I have the thickness of this component that I want to have exportable. And I know that I want the width of this component. And then I also want the angle value for this component. And so all I'm going to do is check the box to export those definitions. If I really wanted to, at this point, I could create a model states table, or if you're using an older version of Inventor, I could publish this out as an iPart where those key values are in place and each row is defined as necessary. But in my scenario, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to update the Content Center library table to do it for me. So in this case, I've got my component defined. Again, I went through the authoring tool to do that. I'm now going to publish this part, just as I did before. And now that I've got that published, I'm going to jump into my Content Center editor, select this curved rail, and then go into my family table for it. In this case, I do want to add another column. In this scenario, this is going to be my angle controller. And in this scenario, I do want to map this to the angle property value. In doing that, I can also come in and specify that it has a custom parameter definition. So I know that this starts at 55, it has an increment of 5 degrees, and it has an upper limit of 55 or lower limit of 55 and an upper limit of 90 degrees. So I can just specify that range within this environment. 55, oh, my bad, I had the order wrong. Minimum 55, increment 5, the default is 55, and the maximum is 90. There we go. Right. So now that I have that, I'm going to come in and make this a key column. Oh, right. Now that I have that, I do need to change how this names the parts. I don't know why I thought I could skip that step. That's definitely going to be critical to this process. So if I check the file names properties, we can see right now it's using just the overall length as a guide. So in my case, in order to make this publish a standard content center file correctly, angle rail, that, followed by the angle value. Actually, let's put this in the middle. There we go. All right. So all I was doing there was just defining how I want this to name it. Now, there is some syntax you can add in here. The system is smart enough to not really need you to do this anymore. But if you put quotes around a piece of text, it makes sure that it understands that that's all one giant piece of continuity. And then in this case, because I have values in here that are parameter values, I can use the and symbol to specify that those are the individual pieces. So in doing that, it just guarantees that it's going to come through in that definition. In my case, I want to add one more couple pieces of property in here. So in my case, I'm just going to put degree in the quote there and start quote, inch, end quote. There we go. So now it's naming those components based on the parameter followed by, in my case, the keystrokes that I wanted to add into it. And because I didn't put in between the quote and the degree word, it didn't put a space here because I didn't put it in the text that I told it to add. So you have a little bit of control within this space, but you can create expressions of any kind of definition that you might need. In my case, if I'm being real picky about the naming convention, you can come in and define that. I've also gone through and done things where I do like Excel-based concatenations, and even do things like, okay, well, if I want it to be, if, say for example, this part is got total number of characters that's 6 units long, I can tell it to do like certain characters minus the period, stuff like that within Excel, and then drive that intelligence back into the table as necessary. But in this case, I should have each one of those defined and linked together. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this. And let's go make sure they work. So anytime you publish data to a content center library, obviously the next big step is to go and flex those models. And when you're doing frame generator structures, you kind of have to flex them twice. The first and easy way is just creating a simple assembly and then inserting those objects to make sure they work properly. So in this case, I'm just going to use the standard place from content center. I'm going to select one of these entities, and then from here, I can just specify the size that I want it to come in as. Now in here, you'll notice that this is coming in as just a base length of 1. And the reason for this is that this entry in the content center library only has a value of 1 in the table. So this, as it's defined, is not functioning properly. So I'm going to cancel out and go fix that value. And basically, I've already done it to the other one. So I just need to go make the edit to the square family. So we'll go to our family table. We need to change our base length to be a custom expression. And then just like before, I can specify my range in here. I'm not going to specify an increment. I am going to default the value, and I'm going to set the maximum to our initial, our cut size at 145. Okay. Now that I've done that, made that quick change, now when I go back into the place from content center and I select that entry, it's now going to prompt me for the value as opposed to choosing from the list, which had 1 entry in it. So from here, I can say, okay, well, let's get 48-inch long. You can choose whether or not you want to do this as custom or as standard. Since these are unique entries, I'm going to tell it to do it as custom. Save this part off. And again, in doing the flexing of this model, I can see that, okay, well, without the frame generator doing all of its extra work, this component doesn't quite name these properly, right? All it's doing is putting in the length of that entry. So again, I could go back in and fix this. I'm not all that concerned about it right now, since I don't want to, keep doing the same steps over and over. So in this case, I'm just going to update the name, save it off, and then I can place these. F6 here. But these will insert now as I expect them to, and they are inserting with the same the standard frame structure inside the model. If I do another place from content center here, select my other entry. In this case, I end up with, I thought I fixed that on this part. In this case, though, I can change the value to say 90. We can see there the naming convention is updated. Why did that not push through? Interesting. I don't know why that part didn't just publish properly. That's super weird. I'd have to go, there's something that happened to the angle parameter in the I part, or in the, in here. Interesting. Huh. I'm not sure why it didn't link the angle value to the actual angle value. For whatever reason, it didn't push back. There's an easy fix for this, and that is in here, we would just convert this to an I part, make the angle value a custom parameter, and basically specify the range and definition like I did in the in the iPart table, we would just do it from here, 5 degrees. Publish this part again. And in doing that, that's now going to give us our two definitions. Next, publish. All right, so now that I've published that second one, let's wipe that one out and try this again. There we go. I don't know why it broke the first time. It shouldn't have needed me to publish it as an iPart. Normally, when you do this, if you go to the Content Center factory and you specify a link to a custom parameter, it will tie the two together. So I must have skipped a step or something in this part in order, whatever I did caused it to fail. But again, if you do want to create custom frames that have multiple size operations in them, you can do that. Now, in this case, I was doing kind of the first flex of this model, just using the place from Content Center and inserting these frames, which is fine, but these are realistically going to be used for the frame generator. So in order to do that, I'm just going to delete all these components and then bring in a skeleton component. And now that I have the skeleton component in place, from here, what I want to do is just jump over to the design side. I need to save my assembly. Test. And now that I've got the assembly saved, I can then start to insert frames. Now, inside of this space, just like we would in the normal process, because we publish these as structural members, they will then show up within this environment. So I can grab my bolt rails, select my T-slot, specify the size, and then come in and select that location, and it will then in turn bring that in. Now in my case, because I didn't define the parameters for the standard nor the size definition of this, which again would just be additional columns within the Content Center library, they're coming in as unnamed. But now that I've done this, I can then insert the frame members along all of my frame lines of my skeleton. I'm not going to do every single one of these, just this far end. Let it automatically name all the components. We can see in here the display names and the frame names that it's going to create. From here, I can then turn off the visibility of my skeleton. And we can see that it did, in fact, overlap them all as it's supposed to. If I were to use the notching tool, I can say I want to notch this component around this component. And as I do that, it knows that shape, so it will automatically pull it back to that member. I'll repeat the process for the other side so we can see the effect on it as well. Notch. Repeat this for the other component here. Notch, edit, custom profile. Okay. I don't know why the notching is not pulling back the material. Notch these two. About that one. There we go. Now we're seeing the preview boundary like it's supposed to. Yeah, it's definitely not cutting these. It's definitely not cutting them the way it's supposed to with the notch profile. I'm not sure what got broken. I know that the other tools are going to work without any issues, like the notch or trim to face. The idea here is that you can tell it to ignore those internal cusps. Yeah, the miter works just fine, but you wouldn't typically miter these sorts of frames. If I use if I use lengthen, shorten, or trim extend, these are all going to notch, or they're going to cut back to the faces as you define them. But because I created that notch profile in the model itself, it should be notching these, and I'm not exactly sure why it's failing. Yeah, because it's doing that, and it's not supposed to do that. Edit frame. 404 open. So just my profile. Well, I'm sorry. I don't know why. I don't know why this suddenly is not working. Let me reopen this and check just to make sure that it did in fact get saved that way. Yeah, I don't know. It's got the full selection in it, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure why it's yeah, I mean, it's all there. So I don't know why I'm not sure why it's not publishing that content as it's supposed to. The notch profile is what is defining, when you run the notch, this is the shape that it's supposed to use when you cut the two parts. And the idea here is that you don't have to necessarily know, you don't have to use the trim to face, you can just choose the notching command. And because this profile is built It's supposed to ignore the inner cusps of this part, allowing you to essentially square cut the ball very quickly using that other tool. Publish editor. The other thing that I skipped in the family table, in the family properties, I didn't put a standard on the component. So that standard is where that unnamed definition comes into play. In this case, I could call this a standard of square. And then if I go to one of these other elements, for example, and check the family table, there's no custom parameters in here for that size definition, but I would need to just add it in. Let's go back over to so all I would need to do in this case is add a column and then link it to that expression for size. And in doing that, it would then in turn in the frame generator, when I insert those frames, refresh the categories here. Not filling in. Wondering if this frame model is just messed up. Let me start up a new part. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank as to why this is not actually notching the components properly. The general idea is that you can create the notching profile in the original shape, and then it will allow you to, when you do the notching in here, it will notch the objects properly. And so you don't have to worry about the interaction of these components using like the trim to frame or the trim extend commands, since you can just notch them. So I apologize, I'm not sure why this frame is not behaving properly. It certainly looks like it's trying to cut it, but it's not cutting it correctly. I don't know why though. In any case, during the course of this exercise, we looked at the project and library configurations, ensuring that we had a library that we could in fact publish to, and also created a category that we can then publish into. We then looked at a square frame, looked at the process of confirming all of its property data, parameter data, and investigated the sketch to confirm it had all the correct data inside of it. We then used the authoring to structural member to convert that extrusion into a functional frame member profile. We then took that frame and published it to our Content Center library. Once there, we looked at some of the options within that library as far as renaming, changing size definitions, and so on, in order to be able to use it as a standard component within our data sets. We then lastly opened it up in the frame generator and inserted frames using that component. So at this point, we'll take a minute and look for any questions here. I don't see any questions in the list other than somebody who was having some issues in the beginning with the audio. Are there any questions at this time?
I don't see any coming in, Keith. Great job.
If there's not any other questions, we can always address them as they come up in the future if you do start to go through this process on your own. You know, as always, Mark, myself, and the other solution engineers are always available. So just reach out if you have any specific questions that come up.
Hey, thank you, Keith, and thank you everyone for attending today. If you do think of additional questions later, you could simply reply to that confirmation or reminder email you received from GoToWebinar. We can get those to the right person to get your questions answered. Once again, there will be a short survey pop up as we close down, and also a reminder that you will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. And with that, we will close the meeting, but thanks for attending and have a great day, everyone.